So rider problems can be grouped into several categories, and this talk this evening, this quick talk, is just setting the scene for later videos that will come along. So make sure you subscribe, and you'll be able to watch the future videos as well. So first of all, as I said, we're looking at the groupings of rider problems, if you like. So common rider problems 1 are problems of insecurity, lack of an independent seat. And symptoms for this include things such as losing the stirrups. This is not necessarily losing them altogether. This could be just where they start to clatter around on your feet, for example. That's also losing the stirrups, meaning that you're losing that detrimental relationship with your stirrups. Your lower legs are no longer behaving properly. More on that later. Hands that won't stay still, that's another sure sign that you don't have an independent seat. And your hands won't stay still until you have an independent seat, because it's not a matter of just making your hands stay still. Still hands actually come from being able to be in complete control of the various areas of your body while you're riding. Gripping knees, another problem is people will start to grip more as they feel insecure. So gripping knees are a sure sign that somebody doesn't yet have an independent seat. Wobbly, disengaged legs. I call them disengaged, meaning what's happened is that the heel has come up above the toe level, and then the lower leg has now become disengaged. It's no longer working correctly. So wobbly, disengaged legs are another sure sign of a lack of an independent seat. Bouncing is a very obvious one. When the horse moves at anything faster than a walk, then you will tend to bounce, particularly in a faster trot and in a canter. And all these things tend to result in a loss of confidence and create a vicious circle, whereby the more insecure you feel, the more you might resort to gripping with your knees harder, thinking it will keep you on when it won't, bouncing more, and so on. So problems of insecurity, lack of an independent seat. When you have an independent seat, you can use any part of your body without it affecting another part. So for a good example of this, of a rider, for instance, that doesn't yet have an independent seat, watch a beginner rider, or think back to when you were a beginner rider, and notice how when they use their legs, for example, their hands shoot up in the air. That's a sure sign of, obviously a beginner rider does not yet have an independent seat. But even more experienced riders can still have a certain amount of this behaviour going on when they ride. And again, this subject of rider biomechanics is looking at these things in detail, ironing out these problems. And we have an article on this subject of confidence, on the subject of having an independent seat on the Horse Riders Mechanic website. So problems with your body, body issues such as asymmetries of the body. Everybody has some amount of crookedness. No one is 100% straight. Some people are a lot more obvious than others, but nobody is totally straight. It's about learning to use what you have as well as possible. Painful or injured joints, big problem for all people really, and a lot of horse riders have these problems because just the fact that if they've been around horses for a while, they may have injured their joints through falling off previously, or just being around horses. Walking on level ground, for instance, makes you more likely to go over on an ankle and sprain an ankle and so on. But the thing is that these problems will affect you when you ride, and it's not necessarily a huge thing, but if you're aware of it, there's a lot you can do to make it so that those joints aren't getting in the way of you riding better. And tiredness, a big problem, especially for modern day riders who actually usually have very busy lifestyles and don't just ride. They often have other things going on in their life as well. So, but with this, on the subject of tiredness, if your body is working incorrectly, whether that be due to asymmetries of your body, previous injuries, or because you're trying to ride in a certain way, or indeed a combination of the above, you'll use more energy and get tired more quickly. So that's something to keep in mind. Whereas if you can get everything working as efficiently as possible, you'll use less energy and won't get tired as quickly. So other problems include problems with the information that you might have previously received. So for example, riders are often taught to do things such as wrap their legs around the horse, which is incorrect. All this does is put an unnatural twist on the joints, particularly in the knees and ankles, and I talk about this quite a bit more. I will do in a later video. Grip with your knees. Riders are often actually told to grip with their knees. In fact, in the old days, riders were taught to ride this way on purpose. They were taught to ride with a coin or a piece of paper between their knees and the saddle, because it was believed that gripping was what kept you on the horse, when in fact it doesn't at all. It's all about balance. Push your heels down. Again, our heels should be just slightly lower than our toes, but that doesn't mean that our heels should be pushed all the way down, as you can see in this picture here on the right. What that means is that the shock absorbers are now at full stretch, so they can no longer work properly. So our heels should only be slightly lower than our toes, so that they can actually dip and spring and work correctly. So riding coaches, unless they have a special interest in the subject of rider biomechanics, tend to teach what they were taught rather than what they actually do. So there is a lot of misunderstandings around about the intricacies of how people ride and what they should do when riding. And the subject of rider biomechanics is not traditionally included in the education of a riding coach. So unless they actually have this special interest, your regular coach, they may be very, very good at getting you and your horse going better, but they might be just missing out on some very important elements that need sorting out in order for you to progress to the next level. Attitude problems. Mature riders, for example, tend to try too hard compared to children who tend to go with the flow. And mature riders do tend to overcomplicate the subject, so they tend to try doing everything they've ever heard over the years. When it starts to get difficult, they start to overthink it sometimes and start trying too hard, as I said. And sometimes it seems that the harder we try, the harder it gets. And frustration can occur because we remember how easy it used to be if we rode as a child. That can actually add to our frustration. And confidence issues, these are a big problem. So confidence issues will unravel your riding ability and can again lead to a downward spiral of events. So they are something that you really do need to get on top of. And it is possible to get your confidence back, but you may also need to be realistic. Remember, ignorance is bliss, and when you apply that saying to horse riding, it means that when we first start out, we don't really know what can go wrong because we've never experienced it. So it's not surprising that people who've been riding a long time often have confidence issues, and that's because lots of things have happened to them over the years. So, and also we have an article on this subject as well on the horseridersmechanic.com website, so have a look at that when you get a chance. Horse problems. It may be that you're riding the wrong horse for you, and that could be that either that totally or currently. So it might mean that by currently, what I mean is that it might be that you just need more education, you and your horse together. It might be that you just need to improve your seat, and then you might make a good partnership. But in other cases, it might be that the horse is just eroding your confidence rapidly, and you really do need to think about riding a different horse, for instance. But it can be very difficult to give up on a certain horse, and this occurs for various reasons, including peer pressure. We generally, as a species of humans, we don't like to give in. And it might be that, for example, we've had the horse a long time, or we bred the horse ourselves, and we have a lot of invested in the horse. And I'm not talking about money necessarily, I'm talking about emotions and so on. If we've had the horse a long time, then it can be very hard to start riding another horse, for example. Again, there's an article on this subject on the Horse Riders Mechanic website too. Gear problems, mainly saddles that hinder rather than help. So as you can see in the picture on the left here, this saddle's not doing this rider any favours at all, and it's almost impossible for a rider in such a saddle to get themselves in a good upright position. So as you can see in this picture, she's actually sitting more as you would on a chair than how you're supposed to sit when on a horse. Again, there's an article on this subject on the website too. If you actually need and want, which obviously you should do, to get your leg underneath you in the correct position, you need a saddle that's going to help you to do that rather than hinder you. Gear problems, it also includes things like stirrups and footwear. So for instance, in this picture on the left here, you can see that the rider has tilted stirrup treads, and all this is doing is actually putting an unnatural twist on the ankle. I have yet to come across a rider that these stirrup treads actually help. I'm sure there are some people that they exist for, but I haven't met them yet. So be very wary about using such things unless you have professional advice, because they can actually cause problems rather than help. Other problems include if you have very loose ankles, very loose joints, then you need more supportive footwear, for instance. So in this case, this rider who does have very, very flexible ankles is wearing the wrong gear for her. She's wearing short boots and riding chaps which are not actually supporting her ankles enough, and that is partly the reason why her heels are actually going too far down. And notice as well how far forward her feet are, because her heels are too far down. So your ankles are your major shock absorbing joints when riding, and you could call them your suspension system. They work in conjunction with two other very important sets of joints when it comes to riding, and that's your knees and your hips. And these joints should absorb the movement of your body and your horse at the same time. They are an interface, if you like, between you and your horse. And what that means is that your horse is creating movement by moving themselves. That movement is mainly upwards and forwards movement, and you need to be able to absorb that upwards and forwards movement into those joints of your body. And if you can't, then you will do things such as bounce, lose your stirrups, feel insecure, and may possibly even feel as if you're going to fall off. So riding well is about learning how to absorb that movement that's happening underneath you into, in particular, these three sets of joints. It's a good idea at this stage to think about how flexible you were when you started out. It's not always helpful to look at how you are now, because a lot might have happened to you between when you were very young and where you are now. So think about how flexible you were as a small child. Some people are naturally very flexible. They're the ones who can do backflips easily and the splits and so on. And other people, even when they were very young, couldn't actually do these gymnastic movements. So if you think about that, then it can actually help you with any problems that you might be experiencing now. So first of all, you need to assess the joints that you have, and they tend to fall into one of three groups: either too wobbly, just right, or too stiff. And in terms of riding, as with many things, somewhere in the middle is actually the best. It's not actually good to be extremely flexible when it comes to riding. Anybody who does have very flexible joints will tell you that it actually is harder work when you have a lot of flexibility in your joints. It means that your ligaments and muscles and so on have to work harder in order to keep you riding properly. And obviously, if you're too stiff, it can be very difficult to absorb that upwards and forwards movement that's being created underneath you by the horse. So a rider that's just right will tend to have joints that are somewhere in between. And if you don't, then you might need to do certain things that will help you to be around the just right level rather than too wobbly or too stiff. And I'll talk about this more in further videos. So you can actually, we're coming to the end of this video now. You can read chapter 1 of the HRM Horse Riders Mechanic Workbook 1, Your Position, and the first 2 chapters of HRM Workbook 2, Your Balance, for free on the website. So why not go along and have a look? And while you're there, there's various articles for you to have a look at as well. So I strongly suggest you go and have a look at those two books and start reading them. There's no catch. You don't have to join anything.